everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Changing Cyber Liability Landscape, What You and Your Clients Need to Know in 2022. My name is Eleni Lepo, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Kitech. Also joining me today is Jason Goebel, and he's Kitech's Chief Technology and Solutions Officer, and also your presenter today. Jason and I have been looking forward to presenting this topic for some time now, as we know that the new cyber requirements have been a big area of concern for so many of you and your clients. We hope that today's session will help you better understand what is being asked on the carrier applications and enable you to in turn help your clients as they work to renew or purchase their own policies. For those of you that are joining us that are not currently working with Kite Technology, we're a managed IT service provider and consulting firm serving small and mid-sized businesses across the United States. While we do specialize in working with independent insurance agencies, we also work with businesses in many other industries, such as nonprofits, accounting and legal firms, healthcare practices, retail and service organizations, and more. In fact, many of these other businesses are actually direct referrals from our insurance clients, which we love and appreciate. We've been around for more than 30 years now, and our goal is to help the businesses that we work with operate more effectively and be more secure. In the insurance space, what sets Kitech apart from other IT providers is the fact that many of our staff have actually previous work experience in the insurance industry. Jason is actually one of those guys. So that gives us that extra expertise and insight on what agencies today require to operate at a high level. I've listed some of the services that we offer here on this slide. So if you'd like to set up a call to learn more or see how we can help you or any of your clients, please send us a message in the question pane and we'll be sure to reach out after the webinar. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Jason, and I'll see you a little bit later for questions. Jason, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Hi, guys and girls. My name is Jason Goebel. I am the CTO and Chief Solutions Officer here at Kitech. I've spent the last 20 years or so either working in or working for insurance agencies, always in an IT space, always in a security space. I am property and casualty licensed here in the great state of Arizona. I'm a national and regional conference presenter, and these days, you pretty much can't get me to shut up about cybersecurity. It's kind of my thing. I'm on a mission to get the word out, get everybody as secure as humanly possible. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk a bit about the threat landscape, what's going on, what's changing in the world of cyber, and why that's affecting these new cyber liability requirements. Some of them, we're already doing, but others of them are quite new. So we're going to talk about where the rubber meets the road, the actual technology requirements, how to get some of this stuff done. We won't get too far down the rabbit hole, but I want to give you enough of a key takeaway so that you can make sure that you're having those conversations with clients who are making sure that the questions get asked and answered properly on these cyber liability applications. And then we're going to hang out for some questions and next steps. So we have an awful lot to cover and a short time to get there. So let's hop in and talk about this threat landscape. So when I talk about what's going on in the world of cyber, I try to keep it out of the nerd realm. So I go back to my good friends at Chubb, the Chubb Cyber Index. Chubb has been tracking this stuff for a long time, and they're seeing massive trends. They're tracking how the claims are being paid, what's causing the claims, what's being impacted. They've got really good data behind this. And what they're seeing is a massive uptick, of course, but they're seeing a disproportionate amount happening in the professional services sector. So IT providers like ourselves often fall into that realm. Sometimes we're in technology, depending on the types of services we offer. Accounting firms, things of that nature. So massive exposure there, massive response to ransomware and other types of breaches there. So you'd think it was, just the large guys, but 34% is under the 25 million mark. So this really is a small business problem as well. Um, that's great news for you guys because everybody needs cyber liability coverage. Everybody needs some form of protection against this because none of us are immune. So the actions causing cyber, what are these things and how are they getting in? Well, 31%, they're social tactics, phishing emails, attempts at getting credentials like, hey, I just sent you this Dropbox link. Can you log in and check out this file? Very common. We've probably all seen it. 23% is malware, you know, malicious links, malicious files and emails, and 21% just the good old fashioned hacking, password cracking, what we call brute force, just attempting to get access to credentials, just using a master database of known passwords. That's going to cover the vast majority of the pie. So who's actually acting on these things? Well, 72% external threats and 14% internal. Now, what do we mean external and internal? Because that's a curious thing. External, those are your bad actors, people that don't work for you. It's going to be your people in Russia. It's going to be your people in India. It's going to be the Nigerian prince. He's still looking for somebody to give him that money, give that money away. The interesting thing is that 14%, that is internal. Those are the people that work for you. Insider trading, insider malicious tactics. We are seeing, and you won't see it on this year's report, but I guarantee you you'll see it on next year's report. We are seeing groups of hackers that they run on business models, and their business model is to reach out to your employees and basically say, so your security's good. I need your help to get around it. What's your price? I just need you to run this file. And then you can walk away with a paycheck. I'll pay you in Bitcoin. I'll put it in your PayPal. Name your price and just run this file. So you're going to see the internal threats start to tick up over the years to come. You can mark my words on that one. So the assets being affected by these cyber incidents, 50%, still the servers, still the ransomware, denial of service attacks that'll take systems offline. 21% are affecting the networks. That's going to be your ransomware that does a lateral move. Sally's PC gets infected, that infects Bob's. Bob's PC gets infected, infects somebody else. And it just moves throughout the network. And 14% are directly at people. That's going to be your business email compromise, your fake invoices, your fake wire transfers. You're going to see that number go up in the years to come as well. So all of that, these massive increases, and the directions that the trends are heading are what's driving these cyber liability requirements. So many huge payouts, and the carriers just they can't absorb that level of risk. So they're trying to reduce their exposure. As a result, now we got some pretty significant cyber liability requirements. So we did a deep dive and we took a look at all of the long form applications of the major carriers. And we read through every single one and we came out with a list of 9 key things that we either often see missed or not in place in client environments, or questions that are answered incorrectly, that may result in a policy not responding the way we think it should. So we put all those together. We got 9 things we're going to hit. We're going to talk about what they are. We're going to talk about why they matter. And we're going to talk about where you need to be. Either you're not meeting the requirement today or the requirement is about to change on you and you want to be prepared for the future. So let's get our fire hose ready and let's dive in and drink from it. So, number one, remote access. When we all went home for the pandemic to work from our couches, everybody scrambled as a means to gain remote access to their network. We didn't have a plan, we just knew we had to get people working again. And that created some pretty significant cybersecurity challenges because we didn't run these things through the proper litmus test. We were bending some rules, we were making some exceptions, we were accepting a level of risk that, under normal circumstances, we wouldn't have been comfortable with. Of course, carriers took note of that, so they are heavily scrutinizing your remote access strategy. A lot of it is centered around multi-factor authentication. They're asking lots of questions specific to multi-factor authentication and remote access to email, to systems, to applications. So you want to be prepared for deploying multi-factor authentication anywhere. That's step number one. The other interesting trend we're seeing, and we're not seeing it on the vast majority of applications yet, but the writing's on the wall, and you will be seeing this in the future. Firewall rules that allow access to internal systems are starting to be heavily scrutinized, and in some cases, just flat out not allowed. We saw an example of a terminal server, and people would remote into that terminal server. There was no exposed RDP, there was none of that. There were simply firewall rules that get you to an RD gateway, and that RD gateway was protected by multi-factor authentication. The carrier in question declined to write the policy because they could determine what the remote access solution was. Not that it was a problem. It's not that it was insecure. It would give a hacker that extra edge to know what kind of system they're working with. Now they're one step closer to knowing how to compromise it. That was not acceptable to this carrier. So be prepared for things like that, and that's going to mean possibly hardware changes. VPNs and MFA and getting that done, getting multi-factor authentication done. Some hardware supports it, some supports it, but doesn't do it well. There are other systems that are more efficient. So be prepared to start making some hardware changes based on what's right for your environment and what's easiest for your employees and end users to work from. So number two, multi-factor authentication. You're going to hear this everywhere all the time. It's going to be like broken record level. You're going to hear this. Let's take a step back for a second. When we talk about multi-factor authentication, we're talking about a combination of things. Something like a password or a passphrase, something you have, could be a physical token, could be a smart card, could be a cell phone with a proximity, or it could be something you are, your fingerprint, your retina scan, your face ID. If you've ever unlocked your iPhone with your face or your Google Pixel with your face, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's multi-factor authentication. You do have the PIN that you can use to unlock the screen, but you can also use your face. So you got multi-factors there. That is, we're starting to see that everywhere. It started with remote access. It kind of moved up to admin access and elevated credentials. If you needed to do something that only an administrator could do on a computer, that would prompt for an MFA. Now we're seeing it on cloud data access, line of business applications. If you've got a cloud hosted application, how's that being protected? Is it multi-factor authentication or is it just standard password? And now we're starting to see all the things. If you've got a password, you need to have multi-factor authentication on it. So that's what you need to be prepared for. So, for example, in this particular application, the word MFA appears 13 times. That's how significant it is that these carriers that you have some level of multi-factor authentication on your network. So again, be prepared for those hardware changes, because not all systems do this well, and not all systems do this easily, depending on what it is. If you've got an older switch or an older router, it may not have these functionalities. If you wanted to avoid the hassle of being prompted and putting in codes, and you wanted to go straight to biometrics, you could do that with Windows Hello. Microsoft built it. But you're going to need retinal scanners, you're going to need 3D cameras, you're going to need biometric fingerprint sensors. Not overly expensive, not like they used to be, but definitely you're going to want those in your budget. So when it comes to the specific type of multi-factor authentication, do you use prompts? Do you use biometrics? Do you use physical keys? Do you use text messages? No one is dictating the type of MFA. So, if Okta is your flavor of choice, that's fine. If Duo is your solution, that's great. If you're just using the native tools, Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, also good. There are no wrong answers here. I do want to caution you though, with the prompts, the MFA prompts, we're starting to see a trend towards brute forcing those. I know you're going to be logging in right around 9 a.m. on a Monday. So I have your username and password. I can start putting that into the system, and you're going to start getting prompts on your phone. So somewhere between your attempt to log in and my attempt to log in, you might click yes on that phone and get one of us in. You might get you in, but you might get me in. So something to be aware of for the future state of things. You might see a trend away from these and more towards things like physical token access, biometrics, things that are much harder because you have to be very intentional about your access. You actually have to put your finger on the thing. So keep that in mind for the future, because these things will shake out. People are going to start asking questions about these. So number 3, endpoint detection and response, which is the fancy term for antivirus. That's what we used to call it. We used to call it antivirus. Antivirus is no longer good enough. You still need something, but it's got to be better than that. So let's take a walk back in time for a second. So a long, long time ago, we had traditional antivirus. It was signature based. Every few hours, Symantec, I'll pick on Symantec. Symantec would republish signatures, all the known files, all the known bad things, and your antivirus would check a list. It had its list of bad things, and it would look at your computers and your systems, and if it matched the list, it would block it, and if it didn't match the list, it would allow it. So that was pretty easy to get around. So, at some point in time in the past 5 or 6 years, 94% of all the viruses being distributed were custom built. It became very easy to build a package, run it through a little bit of an algorithm, and come out with an exploit that had a unique signature. So it wouldn't match any list. And then the next one that came out, same thing, unique signature, wouldn't match any list. So we moved on to the next generation antivirus. Artificial intelligence comes into play, heuristics, educated guesses come into play. We don't know that the file's bad, but we think it doesn't belong, so we're going to block it for now. until you tell us what you'd like to do with it. Should we allow it? Should we quarantine it? Should we delete it? So that became your next generation antivirus. A lot better, a lot more effective, but still, we're looking at the endpoint and we're looking at point in time. There was a file, we flagged it. How would you like to proceed? Well, in the current state of things, that's not good enough. Now we need endpoint detection and response. And there's an emphasis on that R, that response. So you got fundamentally right out of the box two flavors: EDR, endpoint detection and response, and MDR, managed detection and response. These two terms can kind of be used interchangeably. General rule of thumb: EDR is the software, whereas MDR is the service. You might hire a team of folks like us to manage that endpoint detection and response software for you, and that would be MDR. Those terms are kind of interchangeable. That is the modern day standard of things. What I want you to be prepared for is XDR. So many acronyms. So how does XDR work? The X is really just, multi stuff. So what XDR is, it'll take an endpoint detection and response engine like an EDR, like a SentinelOne, and it'll ingest that data. But it'll also look at other sources. It'll look at logging, it'll look at usernames and passwords, it'll look at history of events, it'll look at syslogs from switches, from routers, and it will aggregate all of that data, and it'll correlate it, and it'll try and arrive at some theories. So now we've taken that AI and we've kind of turned it up to 10 here. So now we have a system that looks beyond the endpoint, and it says, okay, I know what the endpoint is doing, but I also know what the system is doing. Does this all make sense? And if it doesn't, because it has so much data, because it has so much of a view of the system, it's able to put two and two together. So it can truly respond in a wonderful way. So here's a screenshot of what I did on my system. I downloaded a file. It was malware, and my XDR system came into play, and it started analyzing that file, and it noted that the file was suspicious. So it opened the zip file and started digging through, and it was, okay, what does this guy do? So it started looking at it. Okay, well, now we have a file. Well, let's look at what else. So in this one instance of this one file being downloaded, my system analyzed 159 correlated events just to fact check, 1,423 files, 285 running processes, 320 services, 439 drivers, and it analyzed the entire system and all of the systems around it, 43 IP addresses, to see where the file went, what it touched, what it knows, and if it made any changes. So now it could go back to the very inception of that file, and because it was aware of every single one of those changes, it could tell me exactly what my threat exposure was. So the moral of that story is, what we used to know as our antivirus, it needs to tell us a story. It needs to be able to demonstrate to us and to our cyber liability masters what happened, what the threat was, and what we did to roll back and contain that threat. If the antivirus cannot tell this story, it's not qualified to do the job anymore. So this is the kind of stuff you want to be looking for in your systems. It needs to be able to tell this story and respond to it. So, our old friends, device management and encryption. This is not new. It's been around for a long time. If you've had to go through NAIC's model law, if you've had to go through New York DFS, NYC RR 500, you've encountered this at some level. encryption on portable devices, encryption on mobile devices, something of that nature. So we're pretty familiar with the requirements for corporate devices. And we're pretty familiar with the requirements of portable devices. We've been seeing that a lot. But this particular application wants to know, how are you managing the data while on employee-owned devices, devices that you don't have access to, that you don't have a legal right to have access to? This is my cell phone. It's not Kitet's cell phone. They've got no legal right into it, and yet I have my email on there. Technically speaking, I have their email on there. So how do we work through this? So what we're seeing and what you need to be prepared for is a trend towards a data-centric view. While yes, the devices are there and they need to be managed and they need to be overseen and things like that, but we're starting to not care so much about the device. Like, nobody gets a pass just because it belongs to me. That's not good enough. We care about the data, where it goes, who's accessing it, and how it's being accessed. Is it being accessed in a secure manner? So you need to be prepared for that. You may need to be prepared for some hardware changes if the devices you have don't support encryption at rest. That's becoming a requirement for Windows 11. So you're going to see a lot of that. Be prepared for trusted platform modules, TPMs. You've probably heard those guys in the news. So be prepared to maybe spend some money to check this fact. So let's go back to those mobile devices for a second, because that's going to be the vast majority of where our employee-owned devices live. So you've got two concepts you're probably going to need to be aware of at some point. MDM, mobile device management, and mobile application management, MAM. MDM is a deeper dive and control of your devices. Mobile application management is less control over the device, but more control over how the data gets accessed. So fun fact, Microsoft 365 includes both. So if you're using Microsoft 365, this is actually easier to solve than you might think. So I got a screenshot here. I won't read it word for word, but it's got a series of scenarios that kind of play out. But let's go back to my device. I own it. It's got Kitet's email on it. Now, Kitet gave me some parameters in which I can access my email. They've got zero visibility into this device. They cannot see all of my Jeep pictures. They would probably question all of my Jeep pictures because it's kind of cult-like. But they don't have access to any of that data. But they made some stipulations within their Microsoft 360 environment that determine how and when I can access. So I must use the Outlook app first and foremost. I can't use the built-in mail app. It won't work. It's been shut off from our system. I have to use the Outlook app. And every time I launch the Outlook app does some systems checks. It makes sure that my device is not rooted or jailbroken. It makes sure that it isn't throwing up any alerts for malware. It makes sure that I'm not downloading from third-party or unauthorized sources. And it makes sure the device is encrypted. If any of those things are not true, Outlook will not give me access to my email. So that's wonderful. I get my security protected. Kitet gets its security protected. It's a win-win. So look for that a lot in the future. A lot of mobile application management, a lot of those checks and balances. Now, as an end user, it does mean that when I open Outlook, I have to give my thumbprint. I have to do a little extra to get into my email. But that's the price for delivering good security that also protects my privacy. So look for a lot of that in the future. Number 5, third-party vendors, of which I am one, so might know a little about this one. So this has been a requirement with NAIC's model law. This has been a requirement with the state of New York, and many other things for quite a while. So as insurance agents, we're probably in a pretty good spot here. But our clients that are applying for these things might not have ever even thought of this. So it's important to know, because you see the policy language, whether the applicant or a third party on the applicant's behalf. You're seeing that language a lot. Third party service providers like myself. We have an obligation to, first of all, maintain a list. We need to know who's got access, how are they protecting it, are they being good stewards of the data, and most importantly, can they prove it? Can they provide proof as my third party provider that they are doing right by my client base? And again, we go back to that data centric view. It's all about the data. I gave you access to the data. The data wasn't mine. It's really Bob's and Sally's and Tom's. It's their social security numbers, their driver's license numbers in those forms, not mine. I myself am just a steward of the data. So any third party vendor needs to meet that level. So you're going to need some questionnaires. You're going to have to be asking your vendors for some pretty significant questions. So where do you start if you don't know? Well, you can start with a cyber liability application. The questions on these cyber liability applications are becoming quite good and quite specific. So if you don't have a vendor checklist, if you don't have a vendor assessment, or if you just want to retool the one that you already have, take the cyber liability application that you're currently figuring out, slap a new logo on it, and ask those exact same questions of your third-party vendors. They might not like you, but it will result in a very good working relationship, so that everybody understands the data, everybody understands the risk, and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Number 6, security awareness. Now we've talked about security awareness and phishing training programs for a very long time. So that in and of itself is not a new thing. You're starting to see very specific questions around social engineering training. So it's not always about using the right password. It's about, you know, can you recognize that spam email? Can you recognize the fake attempt to get you to do some things? So the training, it's staying. The testing, it's staying. The phishing attempts, the simulation, that's saying. What we need to be prepared for now is dark web monitoring. We're starting to see some requirements, and right now it's the minority of applications that are asking these questions, but we're starting to see the questions being asked. Are you monitoring the dark web? Do you have a process for monitoring the dark web, or for monitoring for compromised credentials? Because that's what we're after here. While we do have MFA, that's one piece of a puzzle. We got usernames, we still got passwords. Do we have a process for ensuring that those passwords are secure? So let me take a step back, because it's always a good refresher course. Because I see a lot of people do security awareness training, but I still don't see a whole lot of security awareness programs. Programs are the whole kit and caboodle. They're the training and the testing to make sure that people are actually paying attention and learning some things. It's the phishing simulation, making sure that the folks are checking those emails, making sure that they're not getting caught, making sure that the ones that do click get some extra training, get some extra hand holding, so that they join the ranks of those that are secure. So the phishing simulation's still there. But accountability has to drive this thing. Data and metrics have to drive this thing. If you've got 50 employees, 48 of them are probably not a risk. So you need to know the two that are. So you're only going to get that with accountability, with analytics, with review of the program, which is why I use that term. And then last but not least, we're going to want to wrap all that up with some dark web monitoring. At the end of the day, we can expect those passwords to be compromised. If it's not our doing, it's going to be Experian with a compromise. It's going to be Microsoft with a compromise, Adobe with a compromise. We need to adopt the mindset that it's going to happen. So we need to know what's out there, and we need to be able to respond quickly. Of course, this opens the gate for password management, ensuring the passwords are secure, ensuring they're not used on multiple sites. That's going to lead you down the path of, should I use LastPass or Dashlane or Bitwarden when it comes to password managers? There are no wrong answers. Anyone is great. You're definitely going to want one because you're going to have to have some kind of a tool to keep this secure. The average employee is now managing over 100 passwords. You just can't keep these things in your head. So if you've got 50 employees and each one's using 100 passwords, I mean, you can do the math. There's just no way that you as a manager of the data can account for all of that with some kind of a tool that's in place. Everybody awake? Good. Number 7, vulnerability management. Those of us in the IT space are pretty familiar with this term. Probably no one else is. So let's talk about what that means when we say vulnerability management. Well, we all know what patch management is. We've been asking that question for a long time. Are we patched up? Do we have the latest patches of Windows? Things of that nature. Probably we do. Microsoft has done a pretty good job of making sure that systems, even if left unattended, most likely are receiving a level of patch management. But what about those third-party software packages? Is your line of business app up to date? What about Adobe? What about Chrome? What about WinZip if you're still using it? Are all of these softwares also up to date? Well, maybe. A lot of them, Adobe gets you lots of prompts when there's an update available. Chrome has a process for auto updating, but some of these guys don't. Some of them are manual, and without a process that encompasses third-party applications, we'll get left behind. Now, what about firmware, BIOS patches, software drivers, hardware drivers? Are these things up to date? Not likely. These things are notoriously difficult to manage, and they are notoriously difficult to update. Now, the main vendors, Dell, Lenovo, HP, they've got software packages that make this a lot easier. But are you managing by them? Does every piece of hardware out there have a process that does this? That's going to be the question. Now we're starting to build a construct of vulnerability management. It's not about Windows. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's about vulnerability in and of itself. So the term that you're going to be most familiar with is CVE, yet another acronym. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. So when a vulnerability is discovered in a system, in a piece of software, in a driver, it gets assigned a number, a CVE number. It gets ranked in terms of severity, high, medium, and low, gives it a scale of 1 to 10. You're going to need to be aware of the CVEs on a network and the CVEs on your endpoint, the things that are affecting it. As you start down the road of doing vulnerability scans and working with carriers like Coalition that are starting to do these things for you, they will come back with a very long honey-do list of CVEs that need to be remediated. So in this example I have on the screen, I call out one very specific CVE, Razor Synapse. Razor Synapse is the software that was installed on the workstation that its sole purpose in life is to control the color of the LEDs on the mouse. That's the level of granularity and control we're going to need to be able to exercise here. We're going to need to be aware of these things. We're going to need to be able to report on them and remediate against them. Microsoft has put a lot of time and treasure into putting tools like this into place. There are other systems, third-party systems, that they really cut their teeth in the enterprise space, but now they're becoming more affordable for, for the common man, for the small business. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars anymore, which is excellent news. So this stuff is really starting to be affordable, but it does require management. It does require some investment. So make sure your budgets are prepared for these things. Number 8, security assessments and penetration testing. So those words are often used interchangeably. I see this question answered wrong an awful lot. There's a fundamental difference between a security assessment and a penetration test. Security assessments are a gap analysis. They're a review of existing security controls and processes, and a gap analysis of processes that may or may not exist. A penetration test is an actual test of those controls and processes. A penetration test is a guy literally trying to break the security controls. That's the difference between the two. So the two terms are not and cannot be used interchangeably. When they're asking about a security assessment, that's a very specific thing. When they're asking about a penetration test, that is a very specific thing. We're starting to see a trend towards penetration testing, which is great from a security perspective, probably some bad news for your wallet. And we're starting to see a trend towards third-party review. So, for example, I'm an IT provider. I provide managed services for my client. I perform security assessments for them, and then we work together to remediate some things. However, a penetration test is every bit as much a test of their system as it is my services. Therefore, ethically, I cannot be the one who provides it. So enter in a third party who will assess us both and make sure that the client has what they need, the controls are working, everything is adequate. They put us both to the test. The downside, penetration tests are expensive. There is no cheap option. So be prepared for that. It's very difficult to put a number on it because everybody is going to have a different environment, and the time it takes to assess an environment is really the cost driver. So $15,000 for an annual risk assessment is not unreasonable. So be prepared. Be prepared within your budget to dedicate a pretty significant sum to these tools. And number 9, last but not least, written information security policies. Again, those of us in the agency space, we've had New York breathing down our necks about this. We've had Nevada, we've had Massachusetts for a very long time requiring WISPs, written information security policies. So I want to go back to the wisdom of my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. McCorkle, who pleasantly reminded me, you don't get credit if you don't turn it in. That's what we're talking about here. So in the last 8 topics, we've talked about a lot of tools. We made a lot of investment in time, a lot of investment in hardware and processes. If we didn't write it down, it never happened. We won't get credit for it. New York doesn't care. The carrier doesn't care. If we didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So New York, in their NYCRR 500 program, they did a very good job of lining these things out for us. Some requirements of documentation. They stated that the documentation needs to cover network security, how you're doing it, network monitoring, how you're doing it, um, customer data privacy, how you're addressing that, vendor and third party management, um, risk assessments, incident response. They want to see policies and procedures on what you're going to do when it's time to move. So if your client doesn't have any of these policies written, I would say take a look at what we already know with New York cyber regulations, and we can help them bridge a gap there. As agents, if we're licensed in New York, or we have non-resident licenses in New York, we have these policies. We need to be very well versed in them. We need to understand what they say and what they mean, um, so that we can help our clients and guide in these policies. Now, we're not lawyers. There is a shared responsibility model. I mean, I can write the policy all day, but it's your policy and you've got to live with it. And that's the same thing. That's the same attitude we need to take with our clients. At the end of the day, it's their security. They're the ones who are attesting and signing that application saying, yep, this stuff is true. I wrote it down. It's the truth. Um, so it's very important that they understand the security. This isn't just a, yeah, my IT guys handle this. Yeah, my IT said it good. No, you have to understand this stuff. Probably not to the granular level that a guy like I need to. Um, but you need to be able, this stuff has to be able to pass the smell test. When you're talking about network security, sit down with your IT guys, explain it to me in layman's terms, and keep explaining it to me until I'm convinced that my client's data is secure. Um, IT guys are pretty used to that, so it won't hurt our feelings if you have to ask us 5, 6, 7, 400 times. We don't care. Security is what we're after here, and the more we all know this stuff, the better we all are. So here's what you need to know about these policies. They will be scrutinized. You may be asked to provide samples. When I renewed my cyber liability coverage this year, I had to provide them all of my policies, all of my cyber policies, my master agreements with my clients, how I conduct my business, heavily, heavily scrutinized. Um, and what we're seeing here, that NAIC model law, what New York did not specifically call out, we're starting to see wire transfer policies being very, very, very critical of those policies. Again, we go back to the stats we see on social attacks and how it's impacting the user, trying to get those users to click on that email, to pay that fake invoice, to send that fake wire transfer, to go out and get all those gift cards. Oftentimes you see some exclusions for voluntarily separating yourself from your money. So be prepared to prove these things. Be prepared to demonstrate the policies, demonstrate how you live by them, and demonstrate how you understand them. And be prepared for those exclusions. This application I show on the screen here is actually a supplement. It's not included in the standard policy. You have to actually apply for this additional coverage that's going to protect you. So they're starting to pick these things apart a bit. Definitely wire transfers, even if you're not trying to get cybersecurity coverage. I mean, this is just, it's huge. One mistake, one payment of an invoice, and $143,000 goes out the window and you never see it again. This is critical stuff, guys. So next steps. Anybody who knows me knows that I don't let you out without giving you some homework. So here we are. Here's your homework. Step one. I want you to rewatch this webinar. We covered a lot of stuff. We shoehorned it into an hour. I'm confident that there are things that need to be rewatched, to be redigested, because this ain't easy. Otherwise, people wouldn't pay me, and I'd have to get a real job. So rewatch this webinar, and then I want you first and foremost look inward and self-assess. Are all of these things true within my organization, within my agency? Because it's going to be much easier for you to have the conversation from a position of the experience of having done it. Step three, I strongly encourage you to be as proactive as you possibly can with your clients. Don't wait until your regular window of renewal. If the longer you get them to accomplish these things, the better the end result of the security is going to be. We've had to scramble quite a bit over the past 18 months or so to find answers to get firewalls, because hardware is pretty hard to come by these days. Trying to find and shoehorn solutions just so that we could meet a deadline. And the end result is, yeah, we met the deadline, but did we really do honor to the security? Did we do it the best way possible? Well, maybe not. Maybe there wasn't time. Maybe the hardware wasn't available, and that's been a difficult thing for all IT, is getting those things done. So be proactive. Give them a heads up. Hey, number one, the premiums are significant here. The increases, very significant, but also the requirements. The longer of a runway you give them, the better the end result is going to be, and the better the likelihood that these policies will approve and renew on time. So that's good. So step four, budget now for those increased costs. Whatever you spent on IT last year, be prepared to spend more. Just go ahead and plan for that, because when these renewals come through, there will be something. Maybe some of your systems can do all the things that are being asked, but there will be some things that will require some additional spend. So budget for those now. And last but not least, ask us some questions. And I said it before the beginning of this. It's hard to stop me from talking about cybersecurity these days. Ask us some questions. We're here to help. Your clients are going to have questions. You guys are going to have questions. The door is open. engage@kitetechgroup.com. Just send an email there, and we will get back to you. It's not like we're going to charge you to answer your question. Now, this is knowledge that needs to get out there the door. So any questions you have, fire them off. We are happy to help any way we can. So, speaking of questions, here we are. We got 5 minutes left in the window, but we will stay here as long as it takes to answer all the questions. So let's get going. I see a few out there.
Yeah, great job, Jason. Thank you so much for all that information. It was definitely a lot. So
I hope everybody's still awake.
I hope so too. All right, we do have a couple of questions, so let's get to them. Here's one from Joan. Are there some instances where a business would incur an expense to implement MFA?
Yes. The good news is there are some instances where they would not. So that's kind of nice. But yes, sometimes, depending on how you're doing the MFA, it may require licensing. Duo, for example, if you choose Duo, you're paying anywhere between $3 and $6 per user for the software. But depending on your IT contract and how that's aligned, you may incur some project dollars to get that implemented. So yeah, it is possible there are dollars in there. I wouldn't say they're pretty significant unless you have a firewall or a switch or a router that simply doesn't support MFA and you have to swap it out. that could be a little costly. But yeah, I would prepare for some money there.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Anne. We have a VPN for remote access. We're getting MFA, but there's some disagreement. Should MFA be set up on the router level or at the workstation level?
That's an excellent question. A lot of it depends on how your network is built. But so here's the thing. So if you're accessing by VPN, step one is an object, a device, gets access to your network by way of VPN. And then you take a step farther. Within that network, you've got workstations. So are you comfortable with your network and the access to your network not being protected by MFA? I bet the answer is no. And I bet the cyber liability carrier's answer is also no. So while that's a very specific question that depends on the network, I feel pretty confident saying, first and foremost, you probably want to have MFA on the VPN itself, and then work your way down from the workstations. It may be that the answer is both, depending on how you have things configured.
All right. Question from Bill. Do you know how well Applied Systems Epic Thin Client Cloud product meet what you talked about today?
Wonderful question. So Applied Systems, they have what they call their due diligence package. They don't just give it to you unless you ask. So if you're working with Applied Systems, ask for their due diligence package. That's going to be what you need to answer all the questions in your third-party questionnaire. They have done a very, very good job of detailing within what they can tell you, because you don't always want to be totally transparent about the security you're providing. Otherwise, people know what to look for in the holes. But they have done a very good job of putting together a package that answers all the questions, that talks about their SOC 2 auditing, stuff like that. I know that multi-factor authentication within the Epic application has been a challenge. It is on their roadmap. They're working towards it. They were working originally with Okta to try and get that done. They did make a shift, which is, in my humble opinion, the right shift, and they're opening up authentication to more providers. So you're not locked into using one vendor now. You're going to have some options that come to the table, which is excellent. But it did delay their delivery of the solution for a bit. So they're on the right track. But yeah, due diligence package is the term that you want to ask them about.
All right, we have another question from Joan. How much more would you suggest adding to the cyber budget?
Ooh, that's completely dependent on what you're spending today and what you have implemented, what your network needs. So it's very hard to answer that question without knowing the baseline. You could be spending 50,000 a year. You could be spending 20,000 a year. It's really hard to answer that question without a thorough network assessment and security baseline.
Question from Richard. Are programs like CC Cleaner that update drivers and analyzes your PC a good tool to implement?
Very good question. It's been a number of years since I've read the end user licensing agreement for specifically CCleaner. But speaking in terms of free tools like CCleaner, Puriform, a couple others, it is very important that you read and understand the end user licensing agreement. Oftentimes, free tools exclude company use. So you might not be in the right realm if you're using those tools in a business environment in the first place. But if you are, and they do the job, then that's great. The challenge you're going to run into using tools that don't have centralized management behind them is scalability and reportability. You got 200 workstations out there. How are you going to manage a process that manually executes this particular process 200 times without fail, and then go back and report and validate the results again 200 times? So as you scale up, that central management piece is going to be critical to success, critical to the reportability of these things. But if you have nothing else, CCleaner would not be a wrong answer, provided that the end user license allows for it. But again, go back to the manufacturer first and foremost. If you're using an HP, you're using a Lenovo or a Dell, they have software that's already built to manage the vulnerabilities of the equipment that you're manufacturing. So I would start there.
Okay. Great. We have a question here from Kamala. Is there an increase in breach through cell phones, remote access compared to desktops in the office?
That's funny. My cell phone's going off. It must have heard you. I went, oh, that's the Nigerian prince. He's been trying to get a hold of him. An increase in breach through cell phones compared to desktops. Not entirely, because the vast majority of the work that we do is still very much happening on the desktop. And modern cell phones, Google led the charge on this, Apple led the charge on this. Modern cell phones come encrypted from the factory. So it's pretty hard to have a cell phone that doesn't have a lock screen. So if I lose this phone and somebody picks it up, the reality is the data is encrypted, and short of having a face that looks an awful lot like mine, you're probably not going to get into it. So from a security perspective, you're probably okay. Of course, the question I have there is, how do you prove it? How do you demonstrate to the guy who's about to pay the bill on your behalf, your insurance carrier, that the device was encrypted? So you still need a way to demonstrate and prove that encryption. But we're still seeing the vast majority of the breaches happening at the desktop, seeing them come through Outlook, malicious links, malicious files. It's just a better breeding ground. The software is easier to write. The controls are often a little looser. And the workstation always has far more access to the data than the phone. My phone has got 128 gigs or 256 gigs. It's an access portal. The data doesn't actually live on the phone. Oftentimes you find the data living on the workstation. So we still see the workstations, laptops specifically, we still see those as being the primary driver of the breaches. When you're clicking on a link and driving through some things, the workstation is far more impacted. However, if it's credentials farming, if I'm just trying to get you to open a file, a lot of times the cell phone is the problem, because you'll get an email here, you're on the go, you're in a hurry, you just click the link, you put, oh, there's a prompt for my password, man, I put in my password, and now maybe I'm in trouble. And if it doesn't work, you're likely to blame the cell phone. Like some things just don't work when you're on the go. So you're like, oh man, that file didn't open. I'm gonna have to try it again on my workstation. So you run into situations like that can be a little slippery.
Yeah, definitely more distracted on our cell phones, aren't we? So
just a tad.
All right.
Logging into secure systems at a red light. You get that. Don't do that. Don't do it.
Not guilty of that. How do we get around not having MFA when Applied Epic manages our email? And is this the Okta that you mentioned?
No, and that's a wonderful question. Um, I tend to recommend that if you're using email hosted by Applied Systems or some other vendor, if they don't offer MFA directly on that email, I always recommend moving it. It's an added expense, but it's worth every penny to have those extra level of controls. That question is probably better asked or better answered by your applied rep. So between that due diligence package that they can offer, I would ask those questions specifically. Hey, I got the cyber liability. They're asking me very specifically, do I have multi-factor authentication on remote systems that contain email? I need to know how to answer this question. Applied Systems, what can you tell me? And take their answer. If it's not technically possible, it could be that there are some mitigating controls around it, and you will have to take that answer in its entirety and go back to the underwriter and say it's technically not possible. We couldn't do it. However, because it's not possible, we implemented all these other mitigating controls. Is that good enough? A lot of times, believe it or not, underwriters are pretty understandable about this stuff. They realize that the guys in the back room that are inventing these new mandates are a little out of touch with where the rubber meets the road. So in the event that you have to answer no to one of these questions, if you can provide a compelling explanation, sometimes you're okay. Sometimes that will get you an extension of time so that you can actually implement the better security controls.
All right. So I think that is all the time. Gosh, it's 2:08 now, Eastern time at least. So we definitely want to go ahead and wrap up and let you guys get back to your day. Jason, if you can share that last slide for us. It just has some contact information. We just want to thank everybody for joining us for our presentation today. And we hope you learned something. We hope that you found the content that Jason shared valuable and that it helped you.
I hope you stayed awake.
We won't tell if you didn't. But hopefully what you learned will help you in turn help your clients better to understand what's coming and prepare for the changes. The Kitech team is here to help. Jason is here to help. If you would like to set up a call to discuss your needs, if you would like to send any of your clients our way for help, we'd be happy to talk with them. Just give them some guidance, offer some recommendations. We'd be happy to do that. You can use any of the contact methods we have listed here. We do have another webinar scheduled for Thursday, May 19th. It's going to be on the Microsoft Teams phone system. So be sure to be on the lookout for that email. We will include a registration link in the follow-up email that will come out on Monday with the recording for today. Also, please remember, do take that survey. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the webinar today. It really does help us to improve the quality of our content. So please let us know how we did. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear them as well. Thanks again all for joining us today. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care now.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.